Right, today we are starting with the fifth chapter, that is traceability and monitoring. And this includes the overview of this section, then traceability itself, relationships and dependencies, approving requirements, baselining approved requirements, monitoring requirements using a traceability matrix, and requirement life cycle. And lastly, managing changes to the requirements. You see, we have reached a place where we have established the requirements. In chapter 4, we were able to completely establish the requirements. Now we want to set in place a mechanism to keep a watch on these requirements, and if there is any change required, so that change must be managed. We are going to be able to trace the requirement. That is one part of this chapter, traceability. You should be able to trace a requirement backwards and forwards. Backwards mean from where this requirement has originated, we should be able to trace it back to that place, and forward to the place where this requirement is going to result into a product or output. So we should be able to look forward and backward, and if a requirement changes, then we should be able to see whether this affects our project objectives, scope, time, and cost or not, and which of the stakeholders are still on or not. So stakeholders will also be changing. That is one part of it. The second part is monitoring of these requirements, baselining, unbaselining, freezing, unfreezing, and all that. And ultimately, the requirement lifecycle is also discussed here. Overview of this section. From the perspective of PMBOK 5th edition, because it was written when the 5th edition was established, traceability and monitoring consist of activities completed to ensure that requirements are approved and managed throughout the project lifecycle. So, uh, if the requirements have been approved and baselined, only then we can be able to trace them and manage them throughout the life of the project, because whenever there is a change in requirements, the traceability will deduct that, and ultimately we will have to bring that change into the requirements. During traceability and monitoring, the traceability metrics and associated attributes are created and applied to help monitor and control the product scope. Approved requirements are baselined and tracked. So once we have established the requirements, agreed the requirements with the customer, we must write them down somewhere. We should get them approved, get them signed, and baseline them. And later we are going to track the baselined version. As new requirements surface, these are documented, added to the traceability matrix, assessed for their impact to the project and product, and presented to stakeholders for approval. Throughout traceability and monitoring, the status of all requirements is communicated using the communication methods defined and approved within the business analysis plan. The kind of thinking that is inherent in traceability and monitoring applies to all projects and all life cycles. Thinking about the relationship between requirements and their relationship to other project considerations such as tests and releases is critical for ensuring project consistency and completeness. Traceability principles that enable change impact analysis are the basis for confirming fulfillment of objectives and ensuring test coverage. So we have traceability principles, and these enable us to see the impact of the change. That is analysis, and this is analysis on which we base the fulfillment of any confirmed objectives. Traceability enables discovery of missing and extraneous requirements. There is a need to track and monitor completed requirements, no matter what type of lifecycle is used for a project or what type of format is used to document the requirements. Traceability should be maintained at a minimum for the entire duration of the project, even when someone with a business case analysis role is no longer associated with the project. Formal and comprehensive traceability and monitoring requires upfront effort for setup, but only provides benefits when there is an ongoing commitment of effort to maintain it and when it is used and referred to by the stakeholders. Organizations that have identified a need for formal traceability and are willing and able to invest in it are more than paid back for that investment because traceability makes it easier for to manage requirements. That said, not every organization or project may need formal and comprehensive traceability. Moreover, some degree of traceability can be achieved in less formal ways and may be sufficient for the work at hand. So that establishes that the level of traceability is required for every project is not same. The more complex and more larger projects probably require more traceability, but for small projects, for small little things which we can agree verbally, probably there is no formal traceability going on, but there is an understanding. Some degree of traceability we should be able to achieve in less formal ways. So this may be sufficient for work at hand. While some examples of streamlined approaches to traceability are mentioned, this section primarily provides information that would enable an organization to undertake formal, comprehensive traceability and monitoring in a way that is in alignment with PMBOK. It highlights the value that these techniques and the underlying thought processes bring and risks associated with streamlining as well as risks of overuse. Practitioners and organizations can use it as a starting point to consider their own traceability needs and risk acceptance to determine the optimal amount of traceability and monitoring appropriate for their work. So there might be different mechanism for traceability and monitoring for different projects, and practitioners and organizations have to come up to that understanding. So far so good. जी बुशरा
जी सर, आपकी
so
आवाज अभी आई है, इससे पहले कुछ?
मेरा ख्याल है there is some problem with the internet or what.
Yes sir, yes sir.
So I was saying the introduction. Is there any question about the introduction?
No, no sir, I think this is what we are discussing, that we will monitor what the requirements are, back forth and forward and the backward direction, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So before we can come up to that level, we must have baseline requirement, properly approved requirements approved by the stakeholder and agreed as baseline, because once we start work on that, that baseline requirement will be the scale, will be the level from which we will start doing the job. And these baseline,
What is the, yes sir,
yes, please.
yes sir, I have a question that why we need this traceability and monitoring, means going
Okay.
forward and backward.
You see, requirements are highly changeable. All the time, customer will desire to change the requirement they have given already, and that happens very often. So, first of all, we
Mm-hmm.
collected the requirements very carefully till chapter number 4, and we baselined the requirements after due approval of the stakeholders. But still, we know and we understand that the stakeholders will change, the requirements will change, and there will be a lot of pressure to bring changes to the requirements. Moreover, when we are maintaining the requirements, there are certain changes which occur which is not desired by the stakeholder alone, but the changes in state of the requirement. Maybe when we try to trace it backwards, we do not find the necessary ingredients which were there, which necessitated the this requirement. If that source is not there, so traceability is kind of objectionable. It is not traceable to its source. Source has been eliminated. So maybe we have to revise this requirement, or maybe whatever we are trying to produce out of this requirement, the output of the product of the project or product, whatever, that is no more traceable through this chain. So this traceability chain we have created from the source till the product must all be intact throughout the project, and if this trace is no more locatable, then the requirement might have changed or might have even been removed. So we have to establish it through this traceability. Got it? Ye Bushra? Hello,
Yes,
Ji.
sir, I understand it.
Okay,
I understand it.
right. So I'm moving ahead with the traceability. Traceability is 5.2, and the first topic in it is what is traceability? 5.2.1. Traceability provides the ability to track product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. Now you can establish the complete chain. The chain starts from the source and it ends at the deliverable that will satisfy the stakeholder. So what all has to be done to meet the source has given us the requirement. That requirement has been translated into these features and functions, and these functions and features are to be achieved through doing certain steps and activities, and ultimately that deliverable will be achieved. So we have to be watchful of the whole trace, right from the source till the deliverable and the satisfaction of the customer. Traceability is sometimes qualified as bidirectional or forward and backwards because requirements are traced in more than one direction. We can trace a requirement from the product backwards to the source, or we can trace a requirement from the source to the product. Not all projects require the same amount of traceability. Therefore, the specific deliverables that will be traced for the project are determined during business analysis planning. So, if you have got 10 deliverables out of a project, the most important or most sensitive deliverables or requirements are to be properly traced. Maybe we do not require the same level of traceability for all the 10 products or 10 requirements. Generally, more complex projects require more traceability, as we said earlier. A project is a heavily regulated industry, or a project in a heavily regulated industry, or one with numerous components, interfaces, risks, and stakeholders will likely require more traceability than a project without these characteristics. From the perspective of PMBOK, traceability includes but is not limited to tracking the following requirements. First of all, business need. You need to track the business need because that was the origin. Then the project objectives. Business need resulted in project objectives that we established as scope, WBS, design component of the product development component, test strategy, test scenario, high level or more detailed level requirements, detailed or high level requirements, different types of functional requirements that are related in each other. For example, adding a new customer type requires changes to several business processes that use customer data. So if there is any change in any one of these items, it will be a ripple effect forward as well as backward. So that is all what we need to look at when we are tracing a requirement. Additionally, some practitioners trace the use cases to acceptance test as well as to other types of requirements and models and diagrams to the related requirements. For projects using an adaptive lifecycle like Agile, epics or user stories may be traced to features and acceptance tests. A Kanban board may provide some amount of traceability. Then is a collaboration point. Decisions about how the traceability process will be conducted are determined during business analysis planning. Conducting minimal traceability can incur project risks, and using an extensive traceability process can consume a lot of time and require extensive management of the traceability links. So you are the best judge. How much traceability do you want? How much risk can you take? And how much detail you want to go in. As I said earlier, if it is a complex project, we probably cannot take any risks and we have to go into the minutest details. But on the other hand, if there is a simple project which do not carry a lot many risks, then we should not waste a lot of time in establishing these traces. Business analysts should work with the project manager to determine how much traceability is appropriate for the project, because traceability impacts the usage of resources and the level of project risk. Traceability requirements provides significant benefits. So we are talking about the benefits of tracing requirements. So first of all, it helps to ensure that each requirement adds business value. Very important point. Every requirement should be adding to the business value. And see what includes it is included in it. Tracing each requirement to the business need, goals, and objectives helps ensure its relevancy. So if the requirement has been properly established, it has a business need, and these business needs are aligned with the goals and objectives, and ultimately, if all this is existing, then this is the relevant requirement. When the requirements help to solve the business problem, taking advantage of the business opportunity, or meets at least one goal or objective, it is relevant and is an indication that the end product will add value. So relevancy is directly proportional to the value addition. On the other hand, when the requirement is unable to be traced to a business need, goal, or objective, its relevance needs to be analyzed. Because if it is no more relevant, why are we fulfilling this requirement? This requirement should go. The business analyst should consider such things as: have the business need, goals, and objectives been articulated in enough detail? A requirement may be relevant, but there may be an incorrectly stated problem or missing objective. This is a very good point, because if we have not, you know, really properly established the requirement, although the requirement itself may be relevant, but the linkage to the business need, goals, and objectives does not exist, not because that is not required, but that because it has been poorly formulated, incorrectly stated statement. So that is an error. Then, are there any missing requirements? Project objectives with no associated requirements indicate that the objective will not be met. I hope you understand this. We have a project objective, but there is no requirement which is trying to fulfill that project objective. Then why are we having, this project objective? Either this project objective is not required. If at all is required, then it must be associated with certain requirements which will add up to the benefit of project objectives. This indicates that the objectives will not be met. Without defining requirements, the end product, service, or result will not add value that the organization anticipates. Does a specific project objective belong in this project? When there are project objectives without requirements, the objective is misaligned with the current project, in which case it belongs elsewhere or should be eliminated. Then it helps to meet the customer expectations. Traceability provides a means to track requirements throughout the project lifecycle, helping to ensure that approved requirements are delivered at the end of the project. For example, a data field on a user interface is an approved requirement, but if it is not developed, tested, or delivered, the expected data field will be missing from the UI in the implemented solution. It helps to manage the scope. It is more difficult for requirements that do not add value to make their way into the product, because approval is provided only to requirements that add value. Predictive projects provide a better case for formal traceability than adaptive projects. However, the lifecycle model is not the only factor that determines the optimal amount of traceability. Other factors include whether or not the business is highly regulated, organizational policies and processes, and the degree to which traceability is actually used. So all of these factors will add up to the matter. The collaboration point here is there is often confusion about project managers and business analysts as to who manages scope. The project manager is responsible for managing the project scope, while the business analyst is responsible for managing the product scope. This we have said earlier as well. The process of tracing requirements is a clear example of the involvement that the business analyst has in scope management at the product level. So, business analysts definitely have his say in the product level scope establishment. Several models that are presented in section 4 previously, which we have studied on requirement elicitation and analysis, also demonstrate how the business analyst analyzes product scope while modeling. Organizations often trace their requirements using a structure called a traceability matrix. So we are discussing the traceability matrix now. A traceability matrix is a grid that allows for the linkage of product requirements from the source to the deliverable that satisfy them throughout the project lifecycle. The implementation of a requirements traceability matrix supports the goal that each requirement adds business value by linking it to the business and project objectives. It provides a mean to track requirements throughout the project lifecycle. So this thread from the source to the product is running across the project lifecycle. Therefore, we can get hold of it anywhere in the life of the project, and we can trace it backwards to the source and trace it forward to the requirements, helping to ensure that requirements approved in the requirement documentation are delivered at the end of the project. The matrix also provides a structure for managing changes, thereby helping to manage the product scope. For formal traceability, a traceability matrix contains a short description of each requirement and facts about the requirements, which are called attributes. So every requirement will have a number of columns. The table of requirements will have a number of columns, each column with a different heading, which is showing the attribute, that specific attribute of that requirement. So every requirement will have a number of attributes. Requirement attributes help define key information about the requirements. Each attribute forms a column in the traceability matrix. So every column in the traceability matrix is basically stands for one attribute. The type and number of attributes selected should be appropriate for the needs of the organization and the chosen project lifecycle. For example, unless the nature of the project or the organizational policies and processes require its use, a project using an adaptive lifecycle may not require the use of a traceability matrix, because a less formal method is generally selected for tracing requirements. Projects following an adaptive lifecycle may also collect fewer attributes. Other factors such as the organizational culture may also influence the formality of the traceability approach. For entrepreneurial organizations may choose a less formal traceability approach. For projects that use a traceability matrix, the business analyst may leverage the organization's standard traceability matrix template. When there is no traceability matrix template, then the matrix needs to be created as part of the business analysis planning. For formal traceability, business analysts should exercise care when selecting requirement attributes to ensure that the proper type and number are chosen. The business analyst should be sure to choose attributes that will actually be tracked and managed and not overlooked. Care should be taken to ensure that selected attributes do not overlap with information that is tracked and managed elsewhere. So we do not want to do any dual effort. So very carefully we have to design it in a way that no duplicate effort is done. When information is duplicated, steps should be taken to ensure it is in sync with all locations. If the same information is required in more than one requirement table, then probably it should be automatically synced. If I make a change in one of the tables, the relevant section or attribute in each of the matrix tables will be automatically synchronized. The organization may determine that some attributes should always be considered. For example, creation date, last revision date, and the version number, due to the value these attributes provide in managing and controlling requirement changes. The organization may determine that some attributes should always be considered, for example, creation date, last revision date, and all that. From the perspective of PMBOK, typical attributes used in the requirement traceability matrix include but are not limited to. Let's see what. Typical attributes used in the requirement traceability matrix are: the one is the requirement identification. Probably in all the cases, we must have a requirement ID, a unique identifier for each requirement. Short textual description. Naturally, whatever the requirement is, a very brief description must also be provided. Then also show the objectives. First of all, which business need is it fulfilling, which business goal and objective it is aligned with, and what are the project objectives which it is focusing on. Then product development stage, we have which stage your product which stage of development is your product in. If it is design or build or test, implement or verify, whichever one of these choices will be the attribute. So these are the 5 different choices which can be filled into this attribute. WBS. WBS structure, a cross reference to deliverables as identified in the WBS. You remember, work breakdown structure is also allocated a numbering system. That numbering system is about the work breakdown structure. Here, the requirement ID exists. So that requirement ID would be related to some of the works in the WBS. So whatever is the relevant WBS identification, that must be, hooked with the requirements ID. Then we have the status. Is this requirement active or approved or deferred or cancelled or added? So these are the various shapes of the status. So status may be an attribute and it could have any one of these 5 values in it. Rationale for inclusion. Why the requirement is important to include. What is the priority of this requirement? How important the requirement is. Who is the owner of the requirement? What is the source of this requirement? From where this requirement came from? What is the version number? When is this requirement completed? Date completed. What is the stakeholder satisfaction? Or define the stakeholder satisfaction here for this requirement. What is the stability of this requirement? What is the complexity of this requirement? What is the acceptance criteria of this requirement? All of these are various requirement attributes. Now, having talked about these requirement attributes, let us put it all together into a requirement traceability matrix as shown in front of you. Requirement traceability matrix will actually include all or many of the attributes we have already discussed in one single chart. You see, in this chart, on the top 4 rows is the name of the project written, cost center and project description. These are general information about the requirement traceability matrix. And then we have got the specific attributes defined for each requirement. For example, the requirement ID 001 has associated ID of 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.2.1 and so on. Then in the column of requirement description, a brief description what this requirement stands for. Next column is about business need, opportunity, goals and objectives. Next column is about the project objectives. Next column is about WBS deliverables. Then product design, the product development. So as we have just discussed, each one of these attributes can be placed in the form of this chart, or you can call it the requirement traceability matrix. And when it is filled out, then all the requirements can be shown in form of one single chart. So all the requirements can be traced, can be placed there, and then it will be easier for us to trace it. What if, for example, 1.0 is a requirement, I can trace it back to the business need, opportunity, goal and objective, or to the project objective, or to the WBS deliverables, or to the product design. I'm going forward now, product development and so on. Traceability matrix hierarchy. A formal traceability matrix is usually built hierarchically. starting from high-level requirements and filling in the details as the requirement is progressively elaborated. This hierarchy is similar to an outline that is filled in as more details is available. There are several advantages of creating a hierarchical grid. It provides a logical order for the requirements, one that is not disrupted when new requirements are added. It is clear where each new requirement belongs and whether it is related to another requirement. It also provides a way to organize requirements to ensure that there are no duplicates or conflicting requirements. Traceability can be started as soon as the first requirement is defined and detailed, because the requirements are progressively elaborated, allowing for the incremental development of the requirements. There is no implied sequence, which enables work to be easily divided up among the team. The traceability matrix is built hierarchically, as I said. Therefore, it provides for the evaluation of each new requirement. High-level requirements are evaluated to ensure alignment with their source. As high-level requirements are defined, these are included on the traceability matrix and traced to the business needs, project objectives, and business goals. As lower-level requirements are defined, these are evaluated against the higher-level requirements for alignment. The lower-level requirements expand on the details articulated in the high-level requirements, and the progression is displayed easily on the traceability matrix. The matrix also helps to evaluate new requirements against associated high-level and lower-level requirements when they are added to ensure alignment in all directions. I hope you understand what I am talking about. I am talking about the numbering scheme of the requirements traceability matrix. You remember it was 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and then it was 1.3.1.
Yes, sir.
So those requirements which could be further broken down would be broken down to that level, but all requirements may not be at the same level. So you can progressively elaborate on those requirements. Maybe at a later stage, I learned that even 1.2 can be broken down. So I can always break it down there and amend my traceability matrix. Are you with me on
Mm-hmm.
that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Collaboration point here is some organizations develop a traceability matrix template as a starting point. That's a very good practice. We must have a traceability matrix template if it is usually used in our organization. During business analysis planning, the business analyst collaborates with the project manager and business stakeholders to determine which components of the template are to be used during the project, which components complete the matrix, and at what point during business analysis is traceability considered to be complete? So this must be defined explicitly by the business analyst during the when the requirements are being established. Then are the relationships and dependencies. The traceability matrix is a tool that supports dependency analysis. What is dependent on what? So it's a thread. It is able to trace things backward and forward. So what is dependent on what? So a dependency analysis has to be done, as well as the impact analysis. Requirements are often related to other requirements. Therefore, sometimes a requirement is not able to be satisfied in a solution without the other being present. So if there is a relation between two requirements, and only when both of those requirements are fulfilled, that specific objective is achieved, then we have to take care of that. Dependency analysis is a technique used to discover these dependent relationships. Once analyzed, a set of requirements on the traceability matrix is recorded by grouping dependent requirements together. Some requirements management tools illustrate the dependencies usually by creating traceability trees. A requirement may be subset of another requirement, as I just said. For example, an organization may have different types of customers, retail customers and business customers, which are considered subsets or subtypes of a customer. All customers may have some common data, such as customer ID, name, contact information, in addition to some common processes performed on the common data, such as ordering products. So, if I'm only talking about customers, these are some of the fields which will be common to both. But what about specific additional fields which are required to be present only for one kind of a customer and not for other type of customer. That means we have to break it down to another level and define those specific ingredients or attributes at that level. Okay. Some requirements are dependent on the implementation of other requirements before they can be implemented. As we were discussing already, an organization is interested to developing a new sales report but discovers that some of the data to be included on the new report is not being captured. In this case, the reporting requirements are dependent on additional functional requirements to allow the new data elements to be captured on the customer order entry screen. So, these are two requirements which have to be fulfilled in a specific order, and only then we can take certain steps. Otherwise, there is no way we can take any steps. An organization interested in improving wait time for customer calling into their phone reservation center finds out that a requirement to add a phone line has been identified as a high priority feature, but unfortunately the existing phone system is unable to accommodate any additional phone lines. So this particular requirement value will not be achieved until and unless a new phone system is implemented. Approving requirements. Organizations and projects vary in how requirements are approved. Some organizations require a formal sign-off on a requirements package, such as a business requirement document. In other organizations, or for specific types of projects, the approval of requirements may be informal, requiring only a verbal approval. The approval process is determined, documented, and approved upfront in business analysis planning. Determining the process early on helps to avoid conflicts later when the approvals are being sought. The approval process may include any of the following. Work authorization system. Now, this is a very important thing. Work authorization system is not a project related thing. This is an organizational related thing. Work authorization system is in an organization how work is assigned to a certain person and how the authorization of that work is granted. So I may tell you that you will do this on Monday morning, but what is the mechanism through which I would know that you have actually started working on that thing exactly at the time which I mentioned? So work authorization system is a assurance system in which we ensure, although the program, the schedule is known to all the people involved, but what is the actual start time of an activity? So as soon as that person who is supposed to be performing that activity, he takes it on, he have to uh, get a permission or authorization to start the work. So that authorization will define the process for authorizing work. It may include process steps, documents, tracking system, approval levels, etc. The work authorization system is one of many organizational environmental factors that lie outside the control of the project team and therefore constrain the project team's options. For example, the team prefers less formality but is constrained by a formal approval process that has been recently introduced to solve the problem of scope creep. So whether we like it or not, whether we want it formal or informal, but there is a formal process which has to be adopted, so we will adopt it. In agile and lean organizations, there is sometimes less formality about authorization, yet there is still some norm or informal agreement about what needs to be approved and how and when approval occurs. An agile team may agree that when the team wants to add any user stories, the product owner needs to approve them before they are put on the backlog. Or it may be decided that the team can add the items to the backlog, in which case the product owner's prioritization of the items becomes the mechanism for approval. Further approvals may be obtained during incremental demonstrations of the working product. What are the various approval levels? Authorization levels are part of a work authorization system, as I said before. Approval levels provide the detail regarding who has the authority to approve new and changed requirements. In absence of a work authorization system, or when the current system does not cover requirements approval, the business analyst, project manager, and sponsor determine requirement approval levels in the business analysis planning. Tools such as RASI. You remember what RASI means? R stands for responsibility. R is responsible, A is accountable, C is consult, and I is informed. So we use it when we assign roles. So tools such as RASI are helpful in facilitating discussions and decisions about approval levels. There are different types of approvals. Distinguishing among these different types helps to avoid confusion about who gets the approval, gets to approve what. For example, approval versus sign off, reviewer versus approver, approval authority versus accountability, rejection of requirements, change control board and approval of changes, expert judgment and approval process. So these are some of the examples of the approval level. First of all, approval and sign off. In one organization, business stakeholders may approve set of requirements during a facilitated workshop, and the sponsor may sign off on the requirements knowing that the business provided verbal approval. So if there is a verbal approval, if there is a procedure existing, that all verbal approvals will be documented by the business analyst or whomsoever is responsible. So that would be taken as such. In this example, there is a difference between approval and sign-off. The sponsor is designated as the only person responsible for sign-off. In another organization, the business analyst, the project manager, all business stakeholders, and the project sponsor are required to sign off on each business analysis deliverable, including all requirement documents. Reviewer and approver. Reviewer versus approver. On one project, it was explained to the testers that they would review the requirements and their inputs was welcome, but they were not authorized to approve or reject the requirement. So reviewer is not supposed to reject or approve. They are just supposed to review and submit their report. The decision to approve or reject is lying with the boss. On another project, testers review the requirements, and when they are not clear, the testers have full veto power to reject any of the requirements. This is another scenario where the veto power is exercised by the requirements. Approval authority and accountability. In one organization, business analysts were expected to be responsible for managing the requirements. The project manager was accountable for ensuring that the requirements were managed, and the sponsor was accountable for the end product and therefore the requirement of that product. So what is sponsor standing for? He is overall accountable for the end product and therefore all the requirements of that product. So this is the overall accountability. Okay, as far as project manager is concerned, he was accountable for ensuring that the requirements were managed. You see, only the management of the requirements is the accountability of the project manager. What is business analyst role? Business analysts were expected to be responsible for managing the requirements. You see the difference between responsible and accountable. The business analyst is just responsible, whereas project manager is accountable for the requirement to be managed, and sponsor has the utmost accountability for overall product and therefore all the requirements of that product. Rejection of requirements. It is not always clear who can reject requirements. In some organizations, the power to reject requirements is granted only to those who are permitted to sign off on them. In other organizations, all participants in the requirement process may be provided with veto power regardless of whether they have been granted approval authority or not. Change Control Board and approval of changes. CCB is formally chartered group responsible for reviewing, evaluating, approving, delaying, or rejecting changes to the project and for recording and communicating such decisions. The CCB is often ultimate source for approving requirements when there is a significant scope change beyond the project manager's ability to approve. Approved requirements are then baselined and changes are proposed through the Change Control Board. The Change Control Board may choose to have change requests under a prescribed dollar limit approved by business stakeholders and our sponsors and change requests over the limit approved by the CCB. So this is very much possible that Change Control Board delegates some of its responsibilities to the business stakeholders. Otherwise, CCB takes on the responsibility. There are many ways for one organization to use a change control board within the requirements process. The process for the current project should be described and documented in the business analysis plan. The collaboration point here is organizations that use an adaptive lifecycle may also have change control boards. When they exist, teams or adaptive lifecycle projects and the CCB need to determine an optimal way to interact with each other. Expert judgment and the approved process. In addition to the business analyst, stakeholders may be asked to provide their expertise. Subject matter experts may be asked to sit on the change control board periodically or when specific changes arise based on their expertise related to the proposed change. Their judgment and expertise are leveraged when assessing whether the changes make sense. When requirement changes require the review of one or more experts, this information should be documented in the business analysis plan. Knowing this detail upfront allows the business analyst and project manager to allocate sufficient time to evaluate requirement changes. Okay, so far so good. Busha, can you hear me? Are you there? Hello, Busha.